And it might seem a little weird, but one of the things I love to do is drive through cemeteries periodically because I look at these headstones, and most headstones will have a birth date, a death date, and a dash. And I ask myself, what are the stories within that person's dash? Every one of us listening today, as we're having this conversation, we're fortunate enough to have an open-ended dash. Our date's not there yet. So that means that every day that we wake up, we still have the opportunity to write our dash.
You wrote the book. We're going to start super high level because I know that myself as a founder, current CEO of a startup in the AI space in insurance, property casualty insurance, talk to a lot of founders, talk to a lot of leaders. How the hell do we figure out what actually matters most? Like this feels like a minute by minute question that oftentimes, especially new founders, new owners are dealing with, but seemingly 25 years into my career, I still deal with it on a daily basis. How do we figure out what are the things that matter the most to us so we can actually focus our time there?
Yeah, so Ryan, that's a great question. And I know we're jumping right into this. So that's the reason we wrote Do What Matters Most, is we spent years developing a system that people can use. So let me tell you what this is not and what it is. Do What Matters Most is not just a few time management tips, but rather it's a program in the system by which someone can organize their lives and take control of their schedules. Because to your point, we did the research and found that 68% of people feel like prioritizing their time is their number one challenge, which I think you just well articulated. What was interesting about that research is that 80% of those same people didn't feel like what they were doing was getting them there. In other words, to-do lists, sticky notes, whatever, AI delegation of time management, whatever people are using, 80% don't feel like it's getting them where they need to be. And what I'm talking about is not just work related. But for many of us listening, we're fathers or mothers. In other words, we're parents, we're spouses, we're sons, daughters, brothers, sisters. We have friends. How do we balance all of that? And then even most importantly, how do we take care of ourselves in the process? Mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And so what Matters Most is it's a program and a system to do exactly that. It's to take care of ourselves holistically in all of those key roles in our lives. And some people would say that's not possible, and I would agree without a system.
I want to touch on actually the third one. One of the things that I've been getting a lot of questions about lately is I think a lot of founders, leaders, owners, et cetera, we'll just refer to them as leaders on the call here. I think that the idea that I'm going to work 18 hours a day and grind. And maybe there are moments where you need to do those things, right? But I think people are looking at their lives, even highly super ambitious people, right, are saying to themselves, yeah, and I still want to coach my kid's baseball team. Like I'm struggling with maybe guilt feelings, maybe, time management for sure, maybe lack of proper prioritization, but also these feelings of guilt around taking time for myself and building these things in because I have this young business or this growing business that I really want to take to the next level. How do you start to marry maybe explicitly some of the emotions around building personal important items into our schedule along with these incredibly important business priorities that we have?
Yeah, so let me answer that from a philosophical standpoint first, and then more onto the Do What Matters Most specific second. So from a philosophical side of it, when we do coaching and things like that, I'll say there are seasons and times where it's okay to sprint. But overall, what we're running is a marathon, and that's a slow pace. And so, yes, if we need to pick up the pace and sprint for a couple of weeks or for 3 or 4 weeks, that's fine. There are seasons where that might be the case. If you're a CPA, the month of April might be a sprint, right? The first 2 or 3 weeks of April. But that kind of cadence and schedule can't be sustained over the course of years in a life if we expect to have a family and other things, if we expect to take care of our physical and mental health. So it's okay to philosophically sprint for a season, but that can't be the way of life continuously. Second to that, on the book cover of Do What Matters Most, there's a phrase we use that says you'll either lead a life by design or live a life by default. One is intentional. One is we're going to have a balanced life, and it very much is possible to do when we have the right system and approach to it, rather than just being yanked around by all of these different things and people that want a piece of our time. And let me just share a quick story with you, if it's okay, to illustrate kind of where you're going with your point. And some the CEO of Cliff Bar went through the Do What Matters Most training. And she said, I wish I would have had this in my 20s. And she was around 47 at the time. And rather than saying, because I get where she's coming from, she says, my life would be so different now if I would have been doing this the last 25 years. But rather than focusing on the past and the gap mentality, my thought for her was, you know what, you're 47. Look at all the life that's still ahead of us. And the rest of the executive team that was listening was like, and look at what we can still do with the rest of our lives, the impact that we can have. And that was the right thinking. So can I just share one little brief story that's in our book? And there's different versions of this floating around out there. I don't even know if it's true. What's more important than whether or not the story is true is the essence and the principle that we take away from it. And I caveat that in the book. So there's this father, figurative hypothetical example of a father that comes home. He spends all day on his laptop just grinding away, got this thing that's due, whatever it is. And late into the evening, his son comes to him and asks, hey, Dad, can I borrow $20? And the dad's like, what do you want $20 for? It's just a little bit put off because he's been a long day. He's at the end of the candle. And the son then asks, well, Dad, how much do you make in an hour? If you don't, and the dad's thing is like, well, all right. And it just kind of hits this blow up point. Son, go to your room. He has a few minutes to kind of calm down and think about it. And he realizes that he was a little too hard on his son. So he goes to his room. It's late at night, and he walks in his son's door, and he can tell that he's crying. And he says, son, so can I ask you a couple of questions? Why were you asking how much I made an hour? And then why were you asking to borrow $20? And his son, through teary eyes, said, well, I saved up $20. And if you're making $40 an hour, I thought that if I could borrow $20, then I would have enough money to buy an hour of your time. And, the father, you could just imagine if this was a real scenario, what would be going through his heart and his mind? And to me, this captures the essence of Do What Matters Most, is we don't have to sacrifice one area of our life for another, but it is very possible to lead a life by design rather than live this life by default that we talk.
Yeah. There was an interview with Elon Musk about a year ago that circles the web. You can find it if you go on X or Instagram, I'm sure. But where the interviewer is asking him about his life. And he stops the interviewer and says, you don't want my life, right? I think we hold up, here's this guy who's got all these companies. He's whether, depending on your viewpoint, you either, see him as a hero or, as a villain, but you have to respect, he's living on cots and his, SpaceX because he's building this thing. But he doesn't, he has this very disconnected life from these different women he's been with and his kids and he, whatever. And he literally says, like, you don't want this life, like where he's prioritized. If you care about some of these other things, it's not there. And I thought that was a really valid point that kind of follows what you're saying, which is he's incredibly intentional about what he wants, but that doesn't mean that that's what everyone is supposed to do. Like, you're not, he has deprioritized his family to build these companies and to create these products that are, generational companies and generational tools, whether it's the rockets or the cars or what, all the other technologies built. I don't want to go down the list. And I think it's very important because we hero worship people, yet we wouldn't trade our lives for theirs. And I think I think a lot of people get lost in setting priorities they think they're supposed to have versus the priorities that they actually want. How do we dig into, and that presents the problem of, okay, what do I actually want out of my life or out of my business? What am I actually trying to do? How do you start to work with people to actually help them determine, like, I think there is a large portion, I don't have a percentage, so this is just gut feeling, a large portion of people who just simply don't know what they want. Like, they're not even sure of exactly what matters to them and what they want their life to be. It's hard to be intentional about something if you're not sure where you're going.
So you just gave like the perfect intro into Do What Matters Most, Ryan. I don't even know if you realized, I don't know if you read the book or not, but you just
I've played this game a couple times at this
point.
So
you just actually led into the perfect intro. And this is why we wrote this book and developed this program. And there are hundreds of organizations around the world that have gone through this training, tens of thousands of people. And over and over and over, we will hear from people that say, this was life-changing. And that's a pretty bold statement, right? Sometimes it becomes cliche. But for 98% of people that go through this training, what I'm about to share with you is a new approach to their life. They haven't looked at their life through this kind of lens. And so as you ask where to start and do what matters most, we've identified 3 habits, and we've developed some tools to include a digital planner for Google and Outlook, as well as customized planners that you can order that will help people do what I'm about to describe to answer your question. And so the first habit and do what matters most of the 3 is to develop a written personal vision for each of the key roles in our life. Now that's the high level. Habit number 2 is to identify what we call our roles and goals. So our 5 to 7 roles, same ones we would use in our vision, and come up with 1 to 4 specific measurable goals around what matters most this year. And then ultimately, the most important of the 3 habits is pre-week planning. And that's where we sit down at the beginning of the week. We go through each of our roles and ask what matters most this week in each of our key roles, the tactical, the execution. So to back up to the point that you just brought up, where are we going? That's why we start with our vision first for each of our key roles. So the first thing I would ask everybody listening to this to do right now is to identify what are the 5 to 7 key roles in your life. So many of us might be parents, as we talked about earlier. That would be a role. Whatever professionally might be your role. So founder, entrepreneur. Maybe you wear a different hat as well professionally. Investor. Great. A couple of those are your key roles. Personal is the most important role of all those, right? We've got to take care of ourselves because we can't draw water from an empty well. And so we've got to take care of ourselves, and that's why it is the most important of all the roles. Husband, wife, these are some other examples of roles. And as the starting point, what we invite you to do, and we walk you through how to do this in 2 chapters in the book. What specific questions can you ask yourself? How do you get in the right frame of mind? What are the things that matter most to you? All of these ultimately become a part of your vision. And the vision is not the goal. What we're doing in the vision is creating a mental reality before the physical reality. And a vision is often talked about but rarely done because in our research, Ryan, to answer your question, only 2% of people have a written personal vision. So for as much as it's talked about, it's rarely done. And that's why it's a powerful starting point. I mean, imagine if you're listening to this, and let's say that you are in the role of parent and spouse, what would actually be your vision for those roles? At the end of your life, when people look back and think of you and describe you, especially as you look back and describe yourself, what type of parent or spouse, or what type of leader or entrepreneur or CEO do you see yourself as? That's the beginnings of the foundation of what your vision is. And you're doing what only 2% of people have done by doing that as a starting point. And that is the first habit, do what matters most. And that's exactly why we started.
Why do you think that percentage is so
easy? Answer. So, because we've done the research on that too. In other words, we've asked the question, why not? And there's a big mix. The number one answer is simply this. For most people, it's really not their fault because they don't know how to do it. Think about this. In high school or college or an MBA program or anything else, what professor or teacher walked you through how to do this? For most people, nobody. And we've trained colleges and professors, UC Berkeley and others. This is as new for them as it is for anybody else in the world. So for most people, it's not their fault because they haven't been able to learn this skill set. Now, if a person has learned the skill set and not done it, that's a whole separate thing, right? But for most people, it's something new to them. And that's awesome. Like the CEO of Cliff Bar. I wish I would have learned this in my 20s. That's an accomplished lady. She just hadn't ever done that before. No one had ever taught her. So that's by far the first reason, is just most people don't know. Number 2 is we don't take the time to step back and do these kind of things. We're so busy grinding. We're so busy in what we call quadrant 1 of our lives that we don't take the time, or I shouldn't say that, we don't make the time to step back and actually do what matters most. In this process of vision and goals, you asked a question earlier, Ryan, which is how do we know what matters most? Habits 1 and 2, developing a vision for each role, and then the goals for this year for each role. That's habits 1 and 2. This is the process of identifying what matters most. Habit 3, pre-week planning, is the doing. That's the execution. How much easier is it to do pre-week planning when it's done in the context of what matters most, our vision and our goals? And so for most people, they don't know, it's not something they learned. The other segment, it's just a matter of making the time to step back and do it. But that can only be done once we know how to do it. That's why, I'm not going to try and sell my book, but that's why having the skill set is so important. It's learning how to do it and then prioritizing the time to do it. And for people that do, 98% will say that it's been life-changing.
Yeah. I shared with my community in my newsletter, this was about a year ago, Derek Sivers' idea, and he came out with this about a decade before, so this is not new, but of hell yes or no, right? And I was talking about this concept of, how many things do we say yes to that in just looking at the request, we don't want to do it. But we say yes to it. And then the time for us to do whatever that thing was, the call or the event or whatever, we're miserable. We don't want to go, right? We're bitching about it the whole way. And then we go, and then we get back, and then we're complaining about the fact, but we said yes to it, right? So I was sharing with them this idea of hell yes or no, which I think is incredibly valuable. However, I love what you've done here, because this idea of having a vision is what actually is, like, you don't know what is a hell yes or no if you don't have the vision beforehand to actually be able to pass it through a filter for what the hell yes is, right? And that to me seems like the biggest issue that so many deal with. Like, I struggle so much with, and personally, because I have this, and there's a lot of people, like, I'm reading a great book right now. I promise that there's a question in here, but it's my show, Rob, so I can do whatever I want. I'm reading this great book right now called No More Mr. Nice Guy. So recovering people pleaser, he calls it nice guy syndrome, where, it's exactly opposite of hell yes or no, right? Like, everything's like, oh, yes, right? And then, and no no's. And you're doing it because you feel like that's what you're supposed to do, what you need to do. And essentially what you're describing, and let me know if I'm wrong, is the filter system that allows you to give a very confident yes or no. Because if the answer is no, you can say, look, I appreciate you. I like you. It's not that I don't want to do the thing you're asking necessarily, but it's not in my vision. It doesn't fit my vision. So I have to say no. And now you have an excuse to do it. It's giving people the firepower to say no to the things that take away the time or take away the energy that they would otherwise spend on the things they do want to do. Is that a good way of framing it?
It is. And by the way, can you still hear me, Ryan? It looks like it's a little choppy there. Can you still hear me? Perfect.
Yeah, I can hear you good.
So let me answer your question in three separate ways, if that's all right. First of all, and it might seem a little weird, but one of the things I love to do is drive through cemeteries periodically. Because I look at these headstones, and most headstones will have a birthday, a death date, and a dash. And I ask myself, what are the stories within that person's dash? What do they do in their dash? And that's a little bit of a philosophical approach. But the whole point is, every one of us listening today, as we're having this conversation, we're fortunate enough to have an open-ended dash. Our date's not there yet. So that means that every day that we wake up, we still have the opportunity to write our dash. And so whether it's professional, whether it's these other roles that we've been talking about, what is it that matters most? And are we doing those things? Because that's the essence of it, right? Are we doing them? And if you don't mind, I'm just going to read two parts of my vision. Is that all right?
No, read away.
So I'm opening up right now my Google Calendar, and I, yes, have these memorized, but I want to make sure I get it right. And I'm being a little vulnerable right now because this is my vision. And again, I want to remind us that vision and goals are habits 1 and 2. The vision is the high level. It's that dash. In the end, how do we hope others will think of us as they look at our dash? And so I'm going to read just two. I'm going to read my personal one, which I've actually not shared with anyone outside my family. This is the first time I've shared this outside my family and really close friends. And then I'm going to read one from my role as father. Now, again, this is mine, right? This is not anybody else's. And so whether you agree with me or not, it's not the point. It's my vision for those roles. So personally, now this all has to do with me. I strive to have a close personal relationship with Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ, and I make time to connect with them daily. I prioritize those relationships above everything else. I focus on learning and living a lifestyle that Jesus Christ lived and taught. I'm healthy, fit, and I live an emotionally balanced life. I maintain a debt-free life and have multiple streams of income that allow me to help others and have a combination of time and financial freedom. And I live life to the fullest so that there's no regrets for lack of trying. That's me personally. Now, in the role of father, let me read this. I'm an example of what a true gentleman looks like. And I have 4 kids, by the way, ages 23 to 16. I'm an example of what a true gentleman looks like. I strive to empathically listen rather than problem solve. I'm the type of person I want my daughters to marry. I'm present with my children and work to develop great memories together. And I help them see their potential and bring out the best in each one of them.
Jeez.
Now, this may or may not be perfect, but this is my vision of who I'm striving to become in this dash. And so the vision doesn't change often. It's really front-loaded. Like once we sit down and identify this, we might tweak it periodically, but it can usually stay for quite a while. And then the goals will come back to each year and adjust those. So one of my goals as a father this year, at least one big trip with each child and canyoneering with the family before September 1st. That's an example of a specific measurable goal that aligns with it. And I'm not overly structured. This doesn't turn us into robots. It's simply saying, let's get intentional about our lives. Let's get intentional about what matters most. Professionally, how do we have a transformational impact amongst all the things that we could be doing? In these other roles of our life, what are the things that matter most? And this program, this approach simply gives us the way that we can do it.
Yeah. What I like about that too is it's the aspirational nature of it allows you to act as if, even if you're not there today. And I've done a bunch of vision statements and different stuff, never as structured. I struggle sometimes with having a system and I actually have queued up. When I finish No More Mr. Nice Guy, I'm actually reading your book next. Your book's the next book on my table, because this is something that I've struggled with. Is like I'll write a vision statement down, right, of something I want to be, whether it's the entrepreneurial side of my life or this side, the podcasting communication side, or it's in my personal life, and I struggle to come back to it, or when I'm off of it, right? Say I do something that doesn't align with the vision, or I make a decision that doesn't align with the vision, or I allow a bad habit to creep in that takes me from it, right? There's like this sense of disconnect or guilt for not living that. And that was a problem for a long time. And about a year ago, I picked up the mantra, act as if, right? So like, even if I'm off pace, right? Like, so maybe, hey, I only want to bring alcohol into my life no more than one day a week, right? A couple social drinks with friends, cocktail here. I like an old fashioned as much as any guy. And, but I don't want that to be a daily habit in my life. Okay. So say, maybe I have a couple drinks with buddies after, a golfing on a Tuesday. And it's like, okay, what would the version of me that I wrote down as a vision statement do? What would that version of me, of exactly who I would love to be, what decision would he make? And then I can say to myself, okay, he would say, I'm good. You guys can drink all you want. I'm just not going to have a beer today, right? I don't need it, right? And that version of me has no problem saying that. So I'll just act like that guy, even though that guy's not me, right? Like, me wants to go put 3 Coors Lights down and hoot it up with my buddies on the golf course. That like the version of me right now wants to do that. But this other version that I wrote down that I'm kind of committed to being to, he would say no. So I'll just act like him. And that has allowed me to come back to like who I want to be. But I need more structure to it, because I do find, and this is why I'm so interested in reading your book and your process, is I find for those of us who do sit down and do the vision, or even to the goal part, it's the process of coming back to the goals oftentimes and in most systems. And this is where I want you to dive in a little deeper. The question that I'm actually working towards is, I find with a lot of the systems, right, they're so structured that the system becomes a job. And all of a sudden you're like, I don't need another job, right? Like, I'm trying to use this system to get more time in my life and be better. I don't want the system that's supposed to be helping me bring time in actually cost me all this time on the back end. So talk to me a little bit about how you said, because you said, it's structure, but it's not like so rigid, right? Like you kind of insinuated that a little bit. So maybe talk through how you get people to keep coming back and not make this feel like just another obligation on your time, like some systems do.
Yeah. So let me preface it with one answer, and then let's talk pre-week planning, because that's the key. The people that do pre-week planning leaving this, total game changer. First of all, I'll say this. People that go through Do What Matters Most, I say this right up front, have some grace with ourselves. In other words, we don't expect perfection from anything, right? I mean, I just don't. Otherwise, it's setting an unrealistic expectation. None of us are perfect. And so, for example, pre-week planning. We invite people to do pre-week planning every weekend, and it takes about 20 to 30 minutes. Now, I was a fighter pilot for 11 years. I would have never dared jumped in the F-16 without doing pre-flight planning, because you can imagine the chaos that would result if we're like, hey, we're just going to wing it today. We would never do that in the fighter pilot world. Well, how many of us go into our weeks without some semblance of a plan and expect a different result than the fighter pilot? That's why we don't do it. And so if we back up, you're describing the intentionality. You use the golf and the drinking examples. You're describing the intentionality and the why for habits 1 and 2, the vision and the goals. It starts to become a guide for who we are. instead of just randomly saying, whatever happens, happens, we're becoming intentional about our dash. What type of leader do I really want to be remembered as? What type of parent and spouse, and what type of friend, etc. That's the why behind those two habits. And that's why we start there. We could have written the book about pre-planning alone, still would have been a game changer. It's just so much more powerful in the context of the vision and goals for the reasons you described, because ultimately that's who we start to become in this journey of life. And it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
It does take time and it takes years, but at least we're on the path. At least we're on that journey. Now, do you mind if I talk pre-planning for just a couple of minutes?
You can talk about whatever you want.
Because this is the execution and this is the doing, which is ultimately what really matters. Pre-planning is a process, like I mentioned, that we invite people to do usually between Friday afternoon to Sunday afternoon at the latest. I no longer say Sunday evening because if we wait till Sunday evening, it's the first thing to go, right? Friends come over, family, and it's like, pre-week planning's out. Pre-week planning is a process that helps people schedule their priorities rather than prioritize their schedule. And there's a saying that you probably heard, and I don't even know who to attribute it to, so many people have said it. Where our focus goes, our energy flows. And so if we don't have a focal point, and this is something we'll actually do during our trainings, we'll have people stand up and put their arms out and balance on one leg with their eyes closed. And they fall and, they're tossing all over. We then have them do the same thing with their eyes open and choose a focal point somewhere at least 5 feet out in front of them. So they'll put their arms out, they'll balance on one leg, and they'll focus on a focal point. And everybody is rock solid. They're balanced. And I'll ask people, so how do we apply that to what we're talking about here and do what matters most? And the common responses are, once we have a focal point, then we're balanced. With our eyes closed, we're all over the place. That's exactly right. So pre-week planning is the process of truly scheduling our priorities rather than prioritizing our schedule and doing exactly what the title of the book is in the program, What Matters Most. So amongst all these things that we have out there to choose from, which ones are the priority? And maybe we can take the rest of the time on this. Can I share the why first, Ryan? There's a leader who went through this, and he said, my leadership approach and style was to show up and deal with whatever comes my way that day. Now, as he was leading this team in a large organization, no wonder he's getting poor reviews on the culture scores for his team. You can imagine, Ryan, what kind of guy that is. And without me, in fact, let me just ask you, without describing anything else about this guy, just by simply saying that, hey, I show up, whatever happens, happens, and my leadership style is let's just deal with whatever happens that day. How do you think it would be to work for that guy?
Chaotic, frustrating, confusing, probably even hot-tempered at times because you get overwhelmed when you run out of energy at the end of the day and problems present themselves.
That's it. Yes, and yes. That's exactly this guy. Once he realized that's what his approach was doing to the people around him, a vision for each role. Okay, what is my vision as a leader? Okay, well, it's not to be that, right? What you just described. What are some things that he could do intentionally this year that would start to move the needle in a different direction? Okay, pre-week planning. Now, let's put ourselves in his role. So rather than just winging it day to day, he's sitting down and saying, what matters most this week? Once he started applying these habits, total transformation on his team, because now he's coming to work and he's no longer just reacting to the fire of the day. And when a fire does come up, he can step in and handle it and then get back right into his plan around what matters most. And so can I just go through the 4 steps of pre-week planning? And I'm going to just ask you, Ryan, you can kind of represent everybody listening to this.
Yeah.
Do you prefer paper or do you prefer Google or Outlook calendars? What do you prefer, digital or paper?
Paper.
Okay. And that's about 40 to 50. It's kind of split. Half and half is about the right number in most cases. So this is why we developed the tool. And I'm happy after the show, Ryan, to give you access to it for a year. It's for Google Calendar or Outlook, or people can get a customized planner to do pre-week planning. The point is the tool is there for either one of your preferences. It's 4 simple steps because, to your point, nobody wants to add one more complex thing to their life. It's got to be simple. 4 simple steps. And we invite people, no matter what you have and do already, bring that to the table if it's working for you and see if this can enhance it, and it will. And that is number 1. And imagine yourself sitting down on a Sunday morning doing this. Number 1 is to review your vision and goals. Now, they're going to be written in your planner or they're going to be in your digital planner. The ones we created are one-stop shop so that you have your vision, goals, and do pre-week planning in that spot. So imagine how awesome it would be to be aligned to your vision and goals and looking at that every week. That's what you mentioned earlier, right? It doesn't help us if we put it in a drawer.
That's right.
Number 2 is to write our roles. Well, that's easy. It's the same roles that we're using in our vision and goals. And I've already shared, what some of mine are. Step 3 is to set action items for each role. In other words, we have a brainstorm with ourselves. And Ryan, do you mind if I just use you as the guinea pig here?
No, fire away.
So what would be some of your roles? So personal already, yes.
Yep.
What
Dad.
else? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
So dad is one. I'd say another one of my roles is CEO of a company, the AI company that I told you about.
Perfect.
Podcaster, creator, coach, which would be what we're doing right
Excellent.
now.
Yep.
Those are probably the top 3, I'd say. There are more, I'm sure, but those are probably the top 3.
Yeah, excellent. And there would be more as we thought more about it. That's a perfect start, though. So let's use those. So you have a vision for each one of those. You have 1 to 4 goals for each one of those for this year. And then now in pre-week planning, we sit down, you going through those roles. First of all, it would be you in step 3, setting action items for each role, saying, what can Ryan do to take care of Ryan this week? Whether that's strength workouts, exercise, scheduling that, elusive doctor appointment, swimming, meditating, yoga, whatever. All the things to take care of you. As a dad, son, daughter, kids.
I got 2 boys.
2 boys.
11 and 9.
And what are their names?
Duke and Colton.
Duke and Colton. So it would be saying, what can I do with Duke and Colton this week? You know what, Duke, I'm going to take him out. We're going to play basketball. Colton, I'm going to take him for ice cream. I'm going to write him a note. Whatever. Now, you could say, yeah, I might have done some of those things otherwise, but most of the time the answer is we wouldn't have done a lot of those things otherwise. As a podcaster this week, what are the things that are important to get done this week to stay ahead of the curve? As a CEO, what can I really do this week that is important? And notice the words I'm using. What can I do? It's not what I have to do. That's a running to-do list. And that's why pre-week planning becomes a game changer. So it's that process of brainstorming for each role. And then the last step is, when will we do it? And we assign a time in the calendar for each of those action items. And that's our plan for the week. And what we've just done is scheduled our priorities rather than prioritize our schedule. And in the spirit of having grace, our target PQ or productivity quotient is 70 to 80%. In other words, of the things that we plan in the week, we only expect us to accomplish 70 to 80%. And that's because life happens. And we allow for that grace. And it's not that we don't give 100% effort. So let's not mistake that. It's that we're allowing for life to happen. And even with that 70 to 80% productivity quotient, a person doing pre-week planning, according to our research, will accomplish 800 to 1,000 additional priorities this year than they would have without pre-week planning with less stress. So by all accounts, that would be life-changing for anybody.
I also like that you said 1,000 priorities, not 1,000 tasks, because I will tell you, when I'm going wrong is when I am being my own taskmaster and just checking off tasks that need to get done versus priorities, right? Those needle moving things, those activities that push energy back into your life, that grow your business, that grow your relationship, that's, whatever the role is, if you defined it. And that's something that I've worked very hard on this year, especially, in the role that I'm in today from a work perspective is, should I be the one as the CEO creating the LinkedIn post? Like, is that a task? Or is it that needs to get done for the business? And just because I can maybe get it done the fastest, I do it? Or is that a priority that actually in my role in this current company in this moment that actually moves the needle forward? And it's like those type of mistaking tasks for priorities. And that's why I love what you've built here. That is I feel like such a common trap that we fall into is prioritizing tasks over priorities.
Yeah. Can I just share 2 quick stories?
Please.
So just to illustrate this point, and you'll notice that almost every one of my examples, other than that one executive, have been outside of work. Because most of the people listening to this, owners, entrepreneurs, we're thinking about work all the time. It's the other roles that get neglected. And so if you notice, most of my examples have been outside of that. And so I'm not minimizing that because like most of us are going to have 1 or 2 or 3 professional roles. It's the other roles that bring them all together that creates that holistic life. So let me just illustrate this with 2 simple stories. Just last week, I went to Washington, D.C. to do a training. As part of my pre-week planning, I had written this. Write a little note to Lana and Clara. So before I left, I walked into their bathrooms and wrote on their mirror in dry erase marker, a little note to them, how much I love them, how great they are. That literally took 30 seconds for each of them. My question is, would I have done that had I not thought about it in pre-week plan? Probably not. How often do we randomly go and write on our kids' mirrors and or send them a little note? Not very often, right? I mean, there was an intentionality behind that. And so I'm no different than anybody else. It just simply wouldn't have happened, as simple as that is, had I not thought about that role as father in pre-week planning. And what can I do for my son, who's in San Diego right now working? How about my other daughter, Bella? And just one more example to illustrate this point. The Pepsi executive team of Pepsi went through Do What Matters Most, and we certify other trainers, and it was another trainer doing the training. It wasn't me. Under the role of father, this executive wrote, "Call my son." Now, seasoned guy, right? By all accounts, you would look at him and say, he's totally successful. And that's one thing I've learned is that pretty much all of us are navigating challenges that the people around us know nothing about, especially as entrepreneurs and owners. And this guy was no exception to that. And so the trainer, just out of curiosity, asked him, "Why call your son?" And his response was kind of a humble statement when he said, "Because I haven't talked with my son in 7 years." What? And the trainer's like, "Whoa, okay, so when are you going to do it?" Step 4. Okay, Thursday, 7:00. Great. 6 months later, there was a follow-on training with the same team, and he said there was just a palpable difference about this individual. And so he asked him, "Hey, did you make that call?" And his response was this. He said, "I saw it there in my planner, and for the first time, I knew I needed to make the call." So he did. And he went on to share that him and his son talked, and him and his son talked, and they couldn't even remember what they'd argued about 7 years prior. And now they've started talking every week, and they've become best friends. And even more so, on that initial call that he had with his son, he found out he had 2 grandchildren who he didn't even know existed. So what if he wouldn't have made that call? And he's probably not that different than many of us, right? Every morning, he woke up knowing he needed to make that call, but what was the next thought? I'll just do it later, next week, whenever. And suddenly 7 years have passed. So as he thinks about his dash, leading a life by design rather than by default, what was the impact of pre-week planning in his life? That simple statement, "Call my son," had a generational impact for him. And let's keep in mind, this is a seasoned, successful guy if you're looking at him from the outside in. And so what's the impact in every one of our lives if we can develop a vision for each of our key roles, what only 2% of people have done, identify 1 to 4 specific targets or goals this year in each role, and then every week or most weeks, giving ourselves some grace, doing pre-week planning and saying what matters most in each role this week and when will we do it? And what's the cumulative impact of that approach to life?
Rob, this has been an incredible conversation. I know, we've gone pretty deep on this, and I have a feeling that a lot of people are going to want to go a lot deeper. So where do they? How do people get into your world? Besides buying the book, like how do they connect with you? How do they go deeper with your company? I know there are a lot of executive teams that listen to the show that could be interested in the training. So like, how do they get deeper into your world? And guys, any of the links or resources that Rob mentions, just scroll down, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening, wherever you listen, and I'll have the links in there for you. So where do we send them, Rob? I think this is one of the most important topics. And even guys, even if you're not in a leadership role, I know we talked a lot about leadership. You could be 25, just getting started in your career. And as Rob mentioned earlier about the CEO of Cliff Bars, starting to put a structure like this in place could put you light years ahead of where you would be otherwise. And I'll tell you, I'm a testament because I didn't have any of this growing up. I came from a family, and God bless my parents. They showed me love. But one was a receptionist and one was a mechanic on a railroad. They had no business skills. We were just getting by, you know what I mean? Like if I had a pair of sweatpants that didn't have holes in them for school that year, that was a victory, right? So like I've learned a lot of these later in life, and I have thought sometimes like if I'm 44, like the CEO of Cliff, but man, if you're listening to this and you're younger in your career, don't pass this off as like, I'll do that when I'm a leader, guys. Dive into these things right now, and the rewards that you get, I promise you, will be exponential. So how do they take that deep dive into your world, Rob?
Absolutely. And by the way, Ryan, if you have children, teach them how to develop a vision for their roles. Teach them how to do pre-week planning. It's a total game changer. My college student son does it, and all of his roommates are like, "What are you doing?" And he taught him, and all of them are doing pre-week planning now. So yeah, you don't have to be an executive or an owner, to your point, Ryan. So 3 ways. Number 1, the book's easy to get everywhere that you would buy a book. Amazon, Audible for the audio version, Kindle, all of that. Do What Matters Most. Make sure you're getting the 2nd edition. of the book. Big changes in the second edition. Number 2, the website is becomingyourbest.com. So becomingyourbest.com. And that really illustrates all of our teachings, our programs that you can go through. You can get certified as a Do What Matters Most trainer or coach, train it inside your own organization. Tons of options there. If you want to get a planner, which I highly recommend, because it's like you talked about your dad, a railroad mechanic. Is that right? You don't be a railroad mechanic without the right tools and expect to be successful. Having the right tools makes a huge difference in this. And so whether you're using Google or Outlook, or you prefer the paper planner, if you'll go to dowhatmattersmostplanner.com, you can get the tool that works best for you, whether it's digital or paper. So dowhatmattersmostplanner.com. So those are the 3 different places that are the starting points, Ryan.
I love it. Rob, I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. This is such an incredibly important topic, especially with all the deluge of stuff we get kind of in this modern age of AI digital era. It's very, very easy to get off track and lose our focus, lose our intentionality. And I love that you use that word. And I appreciate this. And guys, I highly recommend, and I was being very honest, like this No More Mr. Nice Guy has me captured, because it's like literally describing my life, and I like have to finish this book. It's so good. But the next one up is this, because this is a place that I struggle with. I struggle with some of this stuff as I described, and I've tried other systems and missed, but I love the simplicity. I love how straightforward it is. And I love how you baked in the ideas of giving yourself grace, right? Like John 3:19, like grace upon grace. Like we want to give yourself that ability to, hey, you put these things down. Don't feel like you're a loser if you don't get 100%. You hit 75, you won that week. That's great, right? You hit 60, you won that week. That's, I love that about your work and about the way you speak on it. So I wish you nothing but the best. Open invitation to come back anytime you want, man. I have a million more questions for you. So thank you. And guys, make sure you dig into Rob's world.